Hello, welcome to MJRRPG. The following is a review of Matthew Sanderson's Call of Cthulhu scenario, Dissociation, from Fear's Sharp Little Needles. As always, the first half of this review is largely spoiler-free, while the second half is completely full of spoilers, so I will warn off any players before I start that. In short, Dissociation is a disturbing ride of a scenario that works best for experienced players with expectations to subvert, rather than new players who will likely just be a bit confused. Dissociation is extremely difficult to give any real details about without delving into spoilers. The title by itself gives away something of the scenario's intentions, so I don't think it would be too revealing to say that the scenario seems to be specifically designed to confound players. In a very good way, of course. Physically, the scenario is short and sweet like all of the entries in Fear's Sharp Little Needles, though the shortness does mean the keeper is faced with extra prep work. It covers only 5 pages, including some stats and a handout, leaving under 4 pages of actual scenario text. As with all its companion scenarios in the book, Dissociation comes with no investigator sheets. More on that in the spoiler section. The actual scene descriptions are broad, leaving the keeper free, or obligated, depending on your temperament, to plan and play the scenarios out as they wish. This also leaves the runtime extremely variable, but for our group we took about 3 hours with me pushing real hard to get the ending in on time. A more relaxed 4 to 5 hour playtime might be preferable, though the breakneck speed we played at did help to keep the players even more off balance. Most Call of Cthulhu scenarios have the theme of there's more to meet the eye, and Dissociation takes that idea and runs with it. For this reason, it works best with players that already have a good amount of role-playing, or Call of Cthulhu gaming in particular, under their belts. New players coming in without expectations or a firm idea of how Call of Cthulhu works in general likely won't find the scenario's twists and turns all that exciting, rather just mechanically confusing. But if you do have a good group of Call of Cthulhu players, and they're on board for something weird and potentially uncomfortable, and the keeper is ready for some extra prep work and improvisation, then Dissociation is a wild ride. Saying more would spoil the wild ride, but both players and keepers won't forget the session anytime soon. Dissociation can be found in Fear's Sharp Little Needles, available on DriveThruRPG in digital and print-on-demand formats. The following section is full of spoilers, so I would suggest stopping here if you're a player or just don't want to know what you're getting into. Dissociation is not a simple scenario to run. It unavoidably requires preparation and improvisation. Preparation can be somewhat alleviated thanks to the internet and material made by other gamers, while the improvisation is something you will just need to accept and be ready for. Aspects of the ending might also need some polishing depending on your reading of it. While sounding complicated, the actual structure of the scenario is very simple, hiding the lack of overall player agency by making that in itself part of the story, though still giving players full control throughout individual scenes. The investigators start on an airplane, but are quickly whisked away through a sudden, seemingly fatal crash. The investigators find themselves in darkness, giving the players some time to speak with each other and form some idea of what is going on. Then, once again, the scene changes. There's a body on the floor of a cabin. They're all covered in blood and half naked, and weirdest, no longer themselves. Different bodies, different voices. And, most mechanically weird, different stats. This happens 2 more times. This is where the preparation comes in. With no included investigator sheets, the keeper doesn't only have to worry about making pre-gens, but alternate sheets as well. Unless the players are coming in with existing investigators, which they really shouldn't unless you've all decided this is your last session or the players aren't overly attached to their characters, the keeper is looking at making 4 sheets per player. Writing pre-gens is something I kind of enjoy. Rolling their stats is something I absolutely do not enjoy, though. At all. Thankfully, Seth Gorkowski comes to the rescue, as he is so wont to do, with multiple sets of investigator sheets. His video review/walkthrough is really all you need anyways, which if you've read or listened far enough into this review to get to this point, oops, looked like you should have just watched that instead. What's actually happening is that the investigators were abducted by Migo, had their brains removed, and are now being put through experiments where they remotely control other test subject bodies. There are 3 experiments in total. The first 2 are straightforward, basically ending whenever the keeper decides the scene is played out long enough. After the experiment plays out, the remote-controlled body is terminated and the investigator's consciousness returns to the black void. The final experiment does not have a cutoff, though. First, the investigators have to fight a formless spawn, and while this isn't particularly difficult as the investigators are kitted out with rifles, knives, and flares, it would be a bit disappointing to die in this place of the scenario. A dead investigator would be returned to the void, but alone, as after dealing with the alien, the other investigators are left to their own devices with the remote-controlled bodies. Following one kind of awkward clue, they are able to find the Migo's lair, There, they can find their brains and discover what is actually going on, along with a bomb about to explode and a Migo scientist escaping through a portal. It does seem a bit odd that the Migo wouldn't also terminate the final remote-controlled bodies just in case, while also thinking of escaping once they found the lair. To alleviate this awkwardness, I considered this all part of the final experiment. The Migo want to see what the investigators do with the final test bodies, and if they find the lair, whether they pursue the sacrificial Migo, go for the bomb, or try to escape. And of course, they're being monitored all this time. Side note, a single Migo isn't a particularly dangerous foe, especially when it's busy and the investigators have hunting rifles. Either be ready for it to die immediately, or give it some powerful spells or devices if you want it to actually be a threat. Should the investigators stop the bomb, this is where you could stretch out the runtime or lead into a second freeform session if so inclined. The investigators have their brains, but are stuck in these new bodies. They can't stray too far from the brains, so they need to drag those around whilst trying to start a new life, or assume the identity of their stolen bodies. Another side note, there isn't any indication ahead of time of the range limit until they go beyond the range of the remote controls, though. I'd suggest just telling them this fact somehow, otherwise they'll likely all die after trying to fly away. It's a lovely ending, leaving the players with that pit in their stomach feeling that the best scenarios give you. They might have won, big old quotation marks around that, but their characters have lost their old lives and the villains are still off doing whatever they do. Dissociation is worthy of a longer page count, but as it stands, even with the extra work it takes to get rolling, it's one of the best scenarios for messing with more experienced players, who might seem like they're getting too comfortable with Call of Cthulhu's tropes and patterns. Dissociation can be found in Fear's Sharp Little Needles, available on DriveThruRPG in digital and print-on-demand formats. Thank you for listening. As always, credit to Cryochamber for use of their album, Cthulhu. Until next time, have a good one.